Okay, happy Monday. And this is chapter 11, the chapter on leadership. And it's a long chapter. It's one of the largest. It's also, in my opinion, one of the most interesting. So at least those two things go together. This publisher PowerPoint presentation is 35 slides. I'm going to skip a lot, okay? And just sort of highlight some of the main things within this chapter. And the important thing to understand when you look at leadership from a communication point of view is that it's very much focused from this critical perspective on the textbook about the creation of meaning and then the significance that that has. The chapter objectives are listed as usual, the things that we're going to look at in this chapter. And so the book chapter begins by giving you sort of a chronological view of some different perspectives on leadership, some different early theories. One of the first ones was that of the idea of the trait theory, and that you find here. With the trait approach, it basically argued that there were essential qualities that every leader had, and if you could obtain these particular qualities, if you had them, if you possessed them, then you had the potential to be a great leader, and if you didn't, well, bummer for you. So it was very much of a different perspective in the whole trait leadership. There were a lot of limitations to it, and I believe your chapter will go into talking, here we go, some of those limitations about the trait approach. And tended, most significantly in my opinion, that it was tended to be inconsistent with the research that supported it. So it was a great theory, but unfortunately not backed up by a lot of legitimacy. So just a very bizarre point of view, very black and white, simple. It's probably the easiest way to analyze a leader is in the trait approach, that you have these certain XYZ things, then you're good, and if you don't, you're not. So it's very black and white, very simple. I suppose that's an advantage, but obviously that was very superficial. The style approach had to do with an emphasis on training and skills. It basically argued that perhaps there were different styles of leadership that worked in some different situations. And the three main styles of leadership you see listed here, the autocratic, laissez-faire, and democratic. These same styles of leadership, by the way, have also been found in some research regarding styles of parenting, so you'll find some crossover. So that's the style approach. Then Blake and Newton's managerial grid. This is, I think there's a graphic on the next slide. Yeah, this is the grid. So it argues that if a leader has an emphasis that is more concerned for people, they'll tend to be on this side. Country style, Country Cub style, or this impoverished style. If they have an emphasis for productivity, they'll either be a team style or a produce or perish kind of a style. So obviously you can see how it works in terms of a matrix. If you're high on both, then that's going to be the team style. If you're low on both, that's an impoverished style. And so this is Blake Newton's managerial grid. It's fairly common theory, shows up in a lot of organizational communication textbooks, probably something good for you to be familiar with, and ties in most significantly and most closely with the research on style leadership. All right, here we have the limitations of the style approach, which are pretty straightforward. The third approach is sometimes called the situational approach, sometimes it's called the contingency approach, and it basically argues that there are a lot of variables that can determine what leadership role is best in that situation, and so it's very contextual, sort of a bigger picture. And some examples of specific models are illustrated, such as Feidler's here, okay? And that's what that's about. It's an example of a situational or contingency model. And then there, of course, as in all things, there are some criticism and critiques. So essentially, to summarize, All three of those traditional views had inconsistencies with research support, and so the link seemed to be a little bit tenuous at best between what the actual research says and the theory, and was very focused on the leader, not focused anything at all upon the follower, and so on and so forth. More new approaches to leadership. One is this idea of leaders as symbolic action, and that basically is arguing predominantly the second bullet point more than anything else, that the leader is about creating a symbolic reality, and where the leader attempts to frame certain circumstances. So leadership becomes most critical in situations of organizational change or organizational dilemma. For example, there's an ethical crisis at your company, at your corporation. You know, how is that challenge handled? How well does leadership rise to the occasion in that approach? So it is obviously further explained. Then this, oh, I'm not advancing. It continues. Transformational leadership. I want to talk about this one for a little bit. Transformational leadership is came about in the late 80s, and in some ways was sort of a flashback to the whole trait approach, you know, in terms of what kind of a person, male or female, but what kind of a leader that you needed to be, and what that was, and about making change from the inside out, and very ethically minded, and this higher purpose kind of a inspirational role. So it does include the notion of the follower or followership. Here you see that. Okay, so then some specific research focuses only on this idea of the follower, which is really interesting research if you really get down to it. I enjoyed reading this section, rereading this section of the textbook again, in terms of understanding some of the literature about the notion of a follower, because obviously leaders don't exist without the follower, and yet there's not nearly as much research on the follower as there is on the leader. So there are different models, such as Kelly's two-dimensional model that explores that, and I think that this chart is fairly self-explanatory. And then we have this romance leadership, which basically sort of puts this leadership in sort of this hero view, and takes it a little bit in a different way. And in terms of a critical perspective on leadership, sometimes this is referred to this notion of discursive leadership, which is the idea that, again, the critical view, remember, it's going to have a lot to do with the construction of meaning, because that's where power is, and that the way that we do that is through our communication, which is why this perspective has sometimes been called a discursive, meaning discourse, approach. And there are 4 different areas of leadership research within this critical view. And the idea of leadership and disciplinary power having to do with what kind of power you wield within an organization, whether that's in terms of punishment or reward. Resistance leadership, this is the idea of dissent, being as a form of leader who's going to be the one to stand up to the man, as it will. Narrative leadership. Interesting research that this deals with how corporations develop their own folk tales, as it was, their own mythology, and these anecdotes, these narratives, help to create culture and influences leadership in that aspect. So I think that in particular is very interesting. And then the third area is the idea of gender and leadership, and some different approaches in terms of the way women lead, and some benefits of it, and criticisms of it as well. Okay, so this is your critically oriented definition of leadership. Again, remember, critical perspective is where Mumby comes from. So leadership is a coordinated social process through which people socially or communicatively construct and experiment new possibilities for thought and action. Such possibilities are recognized by the group or organization as moving beyond self-interest and a collective higher good. Within this communication process, individuals may be constructed as leaders who help guide and facilitate decision-making and action. So anyways, the chapter gives you a little bit of a chronological historical views on some different approaches on leadership, and tackles this some new, more current research such as symbolic action, the research on fellowship, and some current research in this critical view of leadership. So that's it on this, and even going through this relatively quickly, it's still 10 minutes. So, but enjoy this chapter. I think it's one of the best chapters in the book, and I'll see you online.